It was a rainy Friday night, and I had just finished a long shift at work. I work in a small city, and while it's usually quiet, the weather had everyone on edge. I decided to treat myself to a night out, grabbing dinner with some friends downtown. By the time we finished, it was well past midnight, and the rain had only gotten worse. I didn't feel like dealing with the wet streets and finding parking, so I ordered an Uber to take me home. The app showed that my driver, named Tom, was only a few minutes away. I stood under the awning of the restaurant, watching the raindrops cascade off the edge, and waited for his car to arrive. The streets were empty, except for the occasional car speeding by, its tires splashing through puddles. A dark blue sedan pulled up in front of me, and the driver rolled down his window. "You Alex?" he asked. I nodded, confirming, and quickly got into the back seat to escape the rain. Tom was an older man, probably in his late 50s, with a friendly demeanor. He greeted me with a smile and a, "How's your night going?" as he started the ride. We chatted casually for a few minutes, talking about the weather and the usual small talk you'd expect. The car's heater was on, and I felt myself relaxing, grateful for the warmth. As we drove, I noticed that Tom was taking an unfamiliar route. I checked the app on my phone, and it showed he was following the correct path, but it felt different. We were moving through a part of town I didn't recognize, with fewer streetlights and more shadows. I brushed it off as just being tired and not paying attention. About 10 minutes into the ride, the friendly atmosphere started to change. Tom stopped talking, and the silence in the car became thick and uncomfortable. I could hear the rain pounding on the roof and the windshield wipers squeaking rhythmically. I glanced at Tom through the rearview mirror, and he seemed to be focused, almost too focused, on the road ahead. Suddenly, he made a sharp turn onto a narrow, unlit road. My heart skipped a beat. Tom, this doesn't look like the right way," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Tom didn't respond immediately. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, but his tone had changed. It was colder, more detached. "Don't worry. It's a shortcut. We'll get you home faster." Every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. I checked my phone again, but now the app showed that the car's location was off the mapped route. Panic started to set in. "I really think you should stick to the main roads," I insisted, trying to sound firm but not aggressive. Tom didn't answer. He just kept driving, his eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. My mind was racing. Should I call someone? Jump out of the car? My hands were trembling as I gripped my phone, contemplating my next move. We drove deeper into the dark, winding road, surrounded by trees on both sides. There were no houses, no streetlights, nothing but the oppressive darkness and the sound of the rain. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Tom, please stop the car. I'll get out here," I said, my voice shaking. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes cold and unreadable. "We're almost there," he muttered. That was it. I knew I had to do something. I unlocked my phone and quickly dialed 911, holding it discreetly so Tom wouldn't notice. The operator answered, and I whispered, "I'm in an Uber. The driver's not taking me home. I think I'm in danger." The operator tried to get more details from me, but I was too scared to speak openly. "Please, just track my location," I whispered before ending the call. Tom made another turn, and I saw a faint light up ahead. As we got closer, I realized it was a gas station, its neon sign flickering in the rain. I gathered all my courage and said loudly, "Stop the car. I'm getting out here." To my surprise, Tom slowed down and pulled into the gas station parking lot. My heart was racing as I grabbed my bag and reached for the door handle. But just as I was about to open the door, Tom turned around and grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful. "You shouldn't have done that," he hissed, his eyes wild. I yanked my arm free and threw myself out of the car, landing hard on the wet pavement. I scrambled to my feet and ran towards the gas station, not daring to look back. I burst through the door, drenched and breathless, startling the clerk behind the counter. "Call the police," I gasped. "Please, call the police." The clerk, seeing the fear in my eyes, quickly picked up the phone and dialed. I glanced outside and saw Tom's car speeding away, disappearing into the night. I collapsed into a chair, my whole body shaking from the adrenaline and fear. The police arrived a few minutes later, and I told them everything. They took my statement and assured me they would track down Tom. I spent the rest of the night at the station, too scared to go home alone. A few days later, I got a call from the police. They had found Tom. He had a record of similar incidents, preying on late-night passengers, but they had never been able to catch him until now. Knowing he was off the streets was a huge relief, but the experience left me shaken. To this day, I still feel uneasy when I get into an Uber. I always check the driver's details and make sure I share my trip with someone I trust. That night changed the way I think about rideshares forever. It's a constant reminder to stay vigilant and trust my instincts, because you never know who might be behind the wheel. I was working my usual shift as an Uber driver. The app pinged with a new ride request, and I accepted it without a second thought. The pickup location was in a quiet, residential area on the outskirts of town. As I drove to the address, I noticed how desolate the streets were. When I arrived at the location, I saw a man standing by the curb. He looked to be in his mid-40s, dressed in a dark coat and hat, which was unusual for the mild weather we were having. He didn't have any luggage, just a small briefcase. As he got into the back seat, I greeted him with a casual, "Good evening." He responded with a nod and handed me a piece of paper. On it was an address I didn't recognize, but I punched it into the GPS anyway. The destination was over an hour away, deep into the countryside. It was an odd request, but not entirely unusual. People often needed to get to remote locations for various reasons. As we drove, the man remained silent, staring out the window. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of the tires on the uneven road. After about 20 minutes, I tried to make small talk. "So, what takes you out this far tonight?" He turned his head slightly and said, "I have some business to attend to." His voice was low and monotone, and there was something unsettling about it. I decided not to press any further. The route took us off the main highway and onto a narrow, winding road surrounded by dense forest. The trees seemed to close in on us, and the further we went, the more I felt a growing sense of unease. My cell service started to cut out, and the GPS signal became spotty. About halfway through the trip, the man suddenly spoke. "Turn off here," he said, pointing to a barely visible dirt road. I hesitated, but he insisted. "This is a shortcut. It'll save us time." Against my better judgment, I complied and turned onto the dirt road. It was bumpy and overgrown, and I had to slow down to navigate the rough terrain. After a few minutes, the road opened up to a clearing with an old, decrepit house in the middle. The windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling off the walls. It looked abandoned. "This is the place," he said, finally breaking his silence. He handed me a couple of bills, more than enough to cover the fare, and got out of the car without another word. I watched as he walked up to the house and disappeared inside. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. I decided to wait a few minutes just in case he needed a ride back. As I sat there, I began to hear strange noises coming from the forest around me. Twigs snapping, rustling leaves, and faint whispers carried by the wind. My anxiety was building, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Suddenly, the man emerged from the house, walking briskly towards the car. He got in and said, "We need to leave. Now." I didn't need any convincing. I turned the car around and started back down the dirt road as quickly as I could without losing control. The man was visibly agitated, glancing nervously out the windows. "What happened back there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just drive," he snapped. "Don't ask questions." The atmosphere in the car was tense. I focused on getting us back to the main road, but I couldn't help but steal glances at my passenger. His hands were shaking, and he kept muttering to himself under his breath. When we finally reached the highway, he seemed to relax a little. "Take me to the nearest town," he instructed. I obliged, eager to get rid of this unsettling fare. As we neared the town, he handed me more money and said, "Drop me off here?" I pulled over, and he got out without a word, disappearing into the night. I drove home in silence, my mind racing with questions. What was he doing at that abandoned house? Why was he so terrified? And what were those noises I heard in the forest? I never found out the answers. but every time I drive near that area, I can't help but feel a chill run down my spine. It was the most unnerving experience I've ever had as an Uber driver, and it still haunts me to this day.